When a sequel exists not to continue a story but to answer its critics, something unusual is happening. Magnum Force wasn't born from box office hunger, it was born from backlash. The original Dirty Harry sparked fierce debate, with accusations threatening to define Clint Eastwood's iconic role. What emerged was a film shaped by controversy, creative tension, and fear. Beneath the action lies a story about power, moral boundaries, and the dangerous appeal of unchecked authority. Its real secrets aren't about stunts, they're about ideology and transformation. But what exactly was this sequel responding to? Number 1. A sequel built as a response. Few sequels are born from controversy, but this one was. Magnum Force wasn't simply a continuation of a successful franchise, it was a calculated reaction to the firestorm surrounding Dirty Harry. Critics had accused the original of promoting authoritarian ideals, and those accusations weren't fading quietly. The studio and filmmakers recognized they had a serious problem that wouldn't solve itself with time or silence. Rather than ignore the backlash, the creative team chose to confront it directly. The sequel was shaped specifically to address concerns about the character's moral stance and what he represented. Every narrative choice, every thematic beat was designed with those criticisms in mind. This wasn't damage control through silence, it was damage control through deliberate storytelling. What makes this approach remarkable is its deliberate nature. There was no panic, no rushed production trying to capitalize on the first film's success before audiences forgot about it. Instead, the sequel became a strategic repositioning of everything Harry Callahan represented. The film exists as a response first and entertainment second, making it one of the most intentionally crafted sequels of its era. Number 2. Eastwood took quiet control. Behind the camera, a power shift was quietly underway. Clint Eastwood wasn't content to simply show up, deliver his lines, and collect a paycheck like many stars of his caliber. During production, he expanded his influence in ways that would reshape not just this film but the entire franchise moving forward. His fingerprints began appearing on decisions that typically belonged to directors and writers alone. The star involved himself in shaping tone, guiding character development, and establishing narrative boundaries that others had to respect. He understood Harry Callahan better than anyone, and he wasn't shy about steering the character in directions he believed were right. His input went far beyond what audiences saw on screen. It extended into the very DNA of the production itself. This behind-the-scenes evolution marked a turning point. The franchise was no longer just a studio property featuring Eastwood. It was becoming an Eastwood-led vision with studio support. The actor was transforming into an auteur, using this sequel as a testing ground for the creative control he would wield throughout his legendary career. Number 3. The movie admits its real source. Sometimes a film's inspiration hides in plain sight, waiting for audiences to notice. The concept of rogue officers executing criminals without trial didn't emerge from American headlines or domestic scandals. Instead, the filmmakers drew from a darker international source: Brazilian death squads that operated with terrifying efficiency during the early 1970s. This wasn't speculation or film historian theory developed decades later. The movie openly acknowledges this inspiration through its own dialogue. Characters directly reference these foreign vigilante operations, embedding the source material into the script itself for anyone paying attention. This transparency is unusual for Hollywood, which typically obscures controversial influences rather than spotlighting them. By grounding the story in real-world horror from another continent, the film gains an unsettling authenticity. The villains aren't fictional constructs invented purely for entertainment purposes, they're based on actual patterns of institutional violence. This international ideological root gives the narrative weight and credibility that purely imagined threats couldn't provide. Number 4. Rewriting Harry's reputation. Reputation management rarely looks like a police thriller, but that's exactly what this sequel became. The filmmakers faced a specific challenge. Harry Callahan had become synonymous with vigilante justice in the public imagination. Whether fair or not, the character was being cited as a symbol of dangerous authoritarian fantasy by critics and commentators alike. Something had to change. The creative team designed every element to distance Harry from that troubling perception. His actions, his choices, his moral compass, all were carefully recalibrated to present a different kind of lawman than audiences expected. The character, who once seemed to operate outside the system, now needed to defend that very system against those who truly rejected it. This conscious narrative correction transformed the sequel into an image repair project. The film wasn't just telling a new story, it was actively rewriting the story audiences thought they already knew. Harry Callahan was being rehabilitated one scene at a time, repositioned from controversial icon to defender of legitimate justice and proper authority. Number 5. Backlash forced a moral pivot. Cultural pressure has a way of reshaping art, and this film proves it definitively. The controversy surrounding the original wasn't just critical noise, it represented genuine public concern about what messages Hollywood was sending to audiences. Filmmakers couldn't pretend those voices didn't exist, especially when they came from influential corners of society and respected publications. The sequel's direction was fundamentally influenced by this backlash. Creative decisions that might have gone one way instead went another, specifically because of the fear surrounding the first film's reception. Writers and producers asked themselves what story would answer the critics rather than inflame them further or repeat past mistakes. What emerged was a film designed as a counter-argument rather than a repeat performance. Instead of doubling down on the elements that sparked outrage, the movie pivots toward a moral framework that directly challenges vigilante thinking. The story responds to fear by acknowledging it, then systematically dismantling the ideology critics had attributed to its predecessor. Number 6. The clean-cut villain's twist. Audiences expect their villains to look the part, but this film subverts that expectation brilliantly. The rogue officers at the heart of the story aren't wild-eyed fanatics or disheveled outcasts operating from society's margins. They're disciplined, respectable, and meticulously polished, the kind of men who would earn praise from their superiors and trust from the public. Their appearance signals competence and professionalism, not danger. This deliberate choice makes them far more unsettling than traditional antagonists. They don't lurk in shadows or announce their malevolence through appearance. Instead, they wear their uniforms with pride, maintain impeccable grooming standards, and conduct themselves with military precision. They represent the ideal that police departments project to the public, which makes their actions all the more disturbing to witness. By presenting authority itself as the threat, the film achieves something remarkable. The danger doesn't come from outside the system. It emerges from within its most trusted ranks. These men believe they're serving justice more effectively than the courts ever could. Their conviction, combined with their respectable facade, creates villains who challenge audiences to question what institutional power truly looks like when corrupted. Number 7. The scene Milius didn't want. Creative disagreements often remain hidden from audiences, but one conflict during production left visible marks on the final cut. John Milius, who contributed to the screenplay, had specific visions for how certain violent moments should be handled. His preference leaned toward restraint in key scenes, allowing audiences to imagine horror rather than witness it directly. Not everyone shared that philosophy. The tension between showing and suggesting violence became a genuine point of contention behind the scenes. A particular scene that Milius believed should rely on implication was instead filmed explicitly. What was meant to be described through dialogue or reaction became visceral on-screen content that left nothing to imagination. The choice reflected a different creative sensibility than the writer intended. This behind-the-scenes disagreement reveals that the film's graphic moments weren't simply gratuitous additions. They emerged from genuine artistic conflict about what audiences needed to see versus what they could imagine for themselves. The final product reflects this tension, containing sequences that push boundaries further than at least one key creative voice believed necessary or appropriate. Number 8. The line myth exposed. Legends have a way of growing beyond their origins, especially in Hollywood. The famous lines that audiences associate with this franchise have developed mythologies of their own over the decades. Stories circulate about spontaneous brilliance, claiming that iconic dialogue emerged from Eastwood's improvisation rather than careful script writing. The reality is considerably less romantic, but equally interesting. The most memorable phrases weren't born in the moment. They were crafted on the page long before cameras rolled. Writers labored over word choices, testing rhythms and impact to create lines that would resonate with audiences. The spontaneity that viewers perceive came not from improvisation, but from performance. Eastwood's delivery made scripted words feel natural and immediate, creating the illusion of off-the-cuff brilliance. Understanding this distinction doesn't diminish the power of those moments. It redirects credit appropriately. The myth of improvisation celebrates the actor while overlooking the writers who constructed those verbal weapons. Performance created the legend, transforming carefully written dialogue into what audiences remember as spontaneous genius. The truth honors craft over mystique, revealing collaboration rather than singular inspiration. Number 9. Realism from gun culture. Authenticity in action films often comes from consultants and technical advisors, but this production took a different path. The tactical realism that grounds the film's gunplay emerged directly from the writer's personal expertise with firearms. This wasn't research conducted for a project. It was knowledge accumulated over years of genuine involvement with gun culture and shooting sports. The 1970s approach to action filmmaking valued a particular kind of authenticity that modern audiences might find unfamiliar. Weapon handling, tactical movements, and procedural details were informed by practical experience rather than Hollywood convention. The result feels grounded in ways that pure imagination couldn't achieve. Details that experts would notice were handled correctly because someone who understood them was crafting the scenes. This knowledge-driven approach distinguishes the film from productions that rely on advisors brought in temporarily. The authenticity isn't a layer applied during production. It's woven into the foundation of how action sequences were conceived and written. Experience replaced consultation, giving the violence a weight and believability that elevated the material beyond typical genre fare of its era. Number 10. The symbolic motor officer. Certain characters transcend their narrative function to become something larger. The motorcycle officer at the center of this story operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, he's a plot element, a figure driving action forward and creating conflict. But beneath that functional role lies something more profound and deliberately constructed by the filmmakers. The character represents institutional power distilled into human form. His motorcycle, his uniform, his rigid discipline, all communicate authority that demands respect and compliance. He embodies the seductive appeal of order imposed without hesitation or doubt. Audiences aren't just watching a villain, they're watching an idea given flesh and purpose, riding through San Francisco with lethal certainty. This symbolic dimension elevates the film beyond simple thriller mechanics. The motor officer functions as a walking argument about what happens when discipline becomes fanaticism and duty transforms into dangerous zealotry. He isn't merely someone to be defeated, he's a concept to be rejected. The role serves symbolism as much as plot, asking audiences to recognize the danger in authority they might otherwise admire or trust instinctively. Number 11. A franchise identity crisis. Balancing spectacle with substance is a challenge few action films attempt and fewer still achieve. This sequel finds itself caught between two competing impulses that pull in opposite directions. On one side stands the expectation for thrilling set pieces and visceral excitement that audiences paid to see. On the other lies the filmmaker's desire to inject genuine moral commentary into a genre often dismissed as empty entertainment. This tension defines nearly every aspect of the production's tone and execution. Scenes that exist purely for adrenaline sit alongside moments designed to provoke thought and ethical questioning. The film wants to entertain and challenge simultaneously, never fully committing to either extreme. It delivers gunfights and car chases while asking audiences to consider the implications of the violence they're enjoying. The result is a movie constantly walking a tightrope without a safety net below. Some viewers came seeking pure action and found themselves confronted with uncomfortable ideas. Others, hoping for thoughtful commentary, had to wade through genre conventions to find it. This identity crisis isn't necessarily a flaw. It's a reflection of a production trying to be more than its genre typically allowed, while still delivering what audiences expected. Number 12. Violence without glory. Action cinema typically treats violence as spectacle designed to thrill, but this film takes a deliberately different approach. The brutality on screen isn't framed as heroic or exciting. It's presented as harsh, uncomfortable, and genuinely disturbing. Audiences expecting the cathartic rush of justified force instead encounter something that resists easy enjoyment. The camera doesn't celebrate what it captures. This tonal choice reflects the production's larger thematic ambitions about power and its consequences. Violence here carries weight and consequence, rather than serving as entertainment divorced from meaning. When characters fall, the film doesn't allow audiences to cheer. Instead, it forces them to sit with discomfort, to recognize that what they're watching represents something ugly, regardless of who pulls the trigger. By refusing to glamorize its action sequences, the movie distances itself from the very genre it inhabits. Discomfort replaces excitement as the primary emotional response the filmmakers seek to generate. This approach risks alienating viewers who came for escapist thrills, but it reinforces the moral framework the sequel was designed to establish. Violence isn't fun here, it's a problem to be confronted. Number 13. Justice buildings as targets. Setting carries meaning in thoughtful filmmaking, and this production uses location with deliberate purpose. Institutions that typically represent safety and order become crime scenes throughout the narrative. Courthouses, police facilities, and spaces associated with legitimate authority transform into sites of violence and corruption. The visual message is unmistakable and deeply unsettling for audiences who trust these structures. This choice systematically undermines the sacred nature of power structures that society depends upon for stability. When violence erupts in spaces designed to contain and prevent it, the effect is profoundly disorienting. The film suggests that danger doesn't merely threaten institutions from outside. It can take root within their very walls and operate under their protection. By making justice buildings themselves into targets, the production reinforces its central themes about corrupted authority visually and viscerally. Audiences can't escape the implication that the systems they trust might harbor the very threats they're meant to prevent. The settings aren't merely backdrops for action. They're arguments about where true danger originates and how effectively it can hide behind respectable facades. Number 14. No superhero version of Harry. Action heroes often become larger than life across sequels, transforming into nearly mythological figures capable of impossible feats. This film deliberately resists that trajectory for its protagonist. Harry Callahan remains grounded, human, and constrained by realistic limitations throughout the narrative. The temptation to elevate him into fantasy territory was rejected by filmmakers who understood what made the character work. The restraint shown in his portrayal serves multiple purposes within the story being told. A superhuman Harry would undermine the moral arguments the film wants to make about justice and authority. By keeping him fallible and bound by genuine human constraints, the production maintains credibility that an exaggerated version would sacrifice. He makes mistakes, faces genuine danger, and operates within recognizable boundaries. This choice represents a conscious rejection of the mythology that often swallows successful characters in franchise filmmaking. Harry isn't transformed into wish fulfillment or adolescent power fantasy. He stays recognizably human, which makes his ethical choices meaningful in ways that a superhero's couldn't be. The film avoids turning him into something audiences worship and instead keeps him someone they might actually understand and question. Number 15. A politically loaded ending. Conclusions carry weight in storytelling, and this film uses its final moments to deliver an unmistakable message. The ending isn't simply a resolution of plot threads, it's a deliberate statement about justice, law, and the boundaries that legitimate authority must respect. Audiences leaving theaters weren't just meant to feel satisfied by narrative closure, they were meant to carry an ideological argument with them. The climax directly challenges vigilante thinking that critics had attributed to the franchise's first installment. Rather than validating extrajudicial action or celebrating violence outside proper channels, the film's conclusion firmly establishes where its protagonist stands on these questions. Harry's final choices communicate values that contradict the accusations leveled against the original, providing the definitive counter-argument the sequel was designed to deliver. This politically loaded ending transforms the movie into something beyond mere entertainment or genre exercise. The conclusion functions as a thesis statement, positioning lawful justice above personal vengeance, regardless of how satisfying revenge might feel in the moment. The film closes not with ambiguity but with moral clarity, ensuring audiences understand exactly what the filmmakers wanted to say about power, restraint, and legitimate authority. Number 16. A villain shift that died. Franchise planning often extends far beyond individual films, and ambitious ideas were circulating about where Dirty Harry could go next. The success of this sequel's approach, pitting Harry against corrupt authority rather than street criminals, sparked conversations about the series' future direction. Institutional villains represented fresh territory that could sustain multiple films without becoming repetitive. The intention was for Magnum Force to establish a new template that subsequent entries would follow. Rather than returning to conventional antagonists, future installments would explore different forms of systemic corruption and abuse of power. This thematic direction promised to keep the franchise relevant and distinguish it from typical cop movies flooding theaters during the decade. However, these ambitious plans never materialized in the way some had envisioned. Later sequels drifted away from institutional critique and back toward more traditional thriller territory with conventional villains and straightforward conflicts. The franchise changed course, abandoning the template this film established. What could have been a sustained examination of authority's dark potential became a single interesting detour before the series returned to safer, more familiar ground. Number 17. Music as emotional control. Sound shapes audience experience in ways that often escape conscious recognition, and this film's score understands that principle deeply. The music doesn't function as typical action movie accompaniment designed to amplify excitement and pump adrenaline. Instead, composer Lalo Schifrin crafted something far more unsettling, a sonic landscape that builds tension and creates pervasive unease rather than thrilling audiences. The score operates as a psychological tool throughout the narrative, manipulating viewer emotions with precision and subtlety. Rather than signaling when to feel excited, the music suggests when to feel afraid, uncertain, or disturbed. This approach supports the film's thematic goals, reminding audiences that what they're watching isn't meant to be purely enjoyable. Discomfort is the intended response, and the music ensures that feeling persists. By treating sound design as emotional control rather than mere accompaniment, the production achieves atmosphere that dialogue and visuals alone couldn't create. Fear is shaped through audio cues that work beneath conscious awareness. Viewers might not notice how the music affects them, but they feel its influence throughout. The score becomes an invisible hand guiding emotional responses toward unease, rather than the excitement typical of the genre. Number 18. Eastwood's career shift. Careers evolve through pivotal moments that redirect everything following them, and this film represents one such turning point. The experience of making this sequel influenced how Clint Eastwood approached roles for years afterward. Something about confronting the criticism of the original and crafting a response changed his perspective on what kinds of characters he wanted to inhabit and what stories deserved telling. Following this production, Eastwood gravitated increasingly toward morally complex figures who defied simple categorization. The clear-cut heroes of earlier work gave way to characters haunted by doubt, burdened by past choices, or operating in ethical gray zones that challenged audiences. His screen identity evolved from straightforward toughness into something more nuanced and introspective, reflecting deeper concerns about violence and justice. The film didn't merely continue his career, it altered its trajectory in lasting ways. The questions raised during production about authority, vigilantism, and moral boundaries stayed with him. Audiences watching his later directorial work can trace threads back to the reckonings that happened during this sequel's creation. The movie changed not just Harry Callahan's image, but the artist who portrayed him, leaving marks visible across decades of subsequent work. Number 19. Critics missed the point. Initial reception doesn't always capture what a film is actually doing, and early reviews of this sequel demonstrate that pattern clearly. Critics focused predominantly on surface-level violence, treating the movie as another entry in the cycle of brutal cop films flooding 1970s cinema. The visceral content drew attention while the ideas beneath it went largely unexamined by reviewers working under deadline pressure. The deeper themes embedded throughout the narrative were overlooked in favor of easier observations about gunplay and body counts. Critics, who accused the film of glorifying violence, missed that it was actually critiquing the very impulses they condemned. The moral framework carefully constructed to answer accusations against the franchise went unrecognized by many who should have noticed it. Surface obscured substance in review after review. Time eventually changed the film's reputation among those who study cinema seriously. Later analysis recognized what contemporary critics missed, that beneath the action beats lay genuine intellectual engagement with questions about power, authority, and justice. The film was misunderstood upon release, lumped together with exploitation it was actually arguing against. Decades of perspective revealed a more thoughtful work than initial reviews suggested or acknowledged. Number 20. A sequel that rewired the series. Sequels typically extend their predecessors without fundamentally changing them, but this film broke that pattern decisively. Magnum Force didn't simply continue the Dirty Harry story, it actively redefined what the franchise meant and what its protagonist represented. Few follow-up films attempt such dramatic repositioning, and fewer still achieve it successfully without alienating the audience that made the original popular. The ideological reshaping that occurred here touched every aspect of the series' identity going forward. Harry Callahan emerged from this film as a different kind of figure than he entered it. The accusations that had dogged the original were addressed so directly that they could no longer stick with the same force. The character had been repositioned, his values clarified, his relationship to justice fundamentally altered in ways that couldn't be undone. What makes this achievement remarkable is its rarity in franchise filmmaking. Studios typically protect successful formulas rather than risk changing them substantially. Yet this sequel deliberately rewired the series' core identity, transforming its meaning rather than simply repeating what worked before. The film stands as proof that sequels can be transformative rather than merely repetitive, altering legacies rather than just extending them into profitable territory. Number 21. America's Fear on Screen. Cinema often reflects the anxieties of its era more accurately than any historical document, and this film captures 1970s America with uncomfortable precision. The nation was reeling from revelations about institutional corruption, governmental overreach, and abuses of power at the highest levels. Trust in authority had eroded dramatically, and audiences carried that suspicion with them into darkened theaters across the country, hungry for stories that acknowledged their unease. The story taps directly into this cultural moment of profound distrust and uncertainty. The villains aren't foreign threats or criminal outsiders. They're the very people society empowers to protect it. This premise resonated deeply with audiences who had watched scandal after scandal reveal that those in power couldn't automatically be trusted simply because they wore badges or held official positions. The film gave narrative form to fears that were circulating throughout American society during this turbulent decade. By connecting its thriller plot to broader social anxieties, the production transcends simple genre entertainment. The narrative mirrors the tension Americans felt toward police, government, and institutional authority during the Watergate era and its aftermath. Fear doesn't just drive the characters on screen, it drives the entire conception of the story from its foundation. The movie functions as a time capsule, preserving the specific flavor of national anxiety that defined its historical moment for future generations to study. Number 22. Vigilantes as a warning. Antagonists in action films typically exist simply to be defeated, but these villains serve a more complex purpose within the narrative structure. The rogue officers aren't merely obstacles for Harry to overcome, they're carefully constructed warnings about what happens when authority operates without restraint or accountability. Their presence transforms the film from simple thriller into cautionary tale with contemporary relevance that extends far beyond entertainment. These characters believe absolutely in what they're doing, which makes them far more dangerous than common criminals could ever be. They see themselves as heroes improving a broken system that coddles the guilty and fails the innocent repeatedly. Their conviction is genuine, their methods efficient, and their results undeniably effective at removing dangerous people from society permanently. The film forces audiences to confront why this approach remains deeply wrong despite its apparent success at achieving safer streets. By presenting vigilantes as warnings rather than simple villains, the production asks uncomfortable questions about power and its limits. Authority without oversight becomes tyranny regardless of intentions or outcomes. The rogue cops function as allegory, representing the seductive appeal of abandoning legal constraints in pursuit of justice that the courts seem unable to deliver. Their defeat isn't just plot resolution, it's the film's moral thesis made concrete, arguing that the process matters as much as the outcome ever could. Number 23. Harry's new moral code. Character evolution across sequels often feels cosmetic, but the transformation here runs deep and deliberate throughout every scene. Harry Callahan enters this film carrying baggage from his previous portrayal. The accusations, the controversy, the perception that he represented dangerous authoritarian impulses that critics found deeply troubling. By the time credits roll, he's been fundamentally repositioned as something quite different from what critics had claimed he was. The film systematically rebuilds his ethical foundation throughout its runtime with careful attention to detail. His choices, his confrontations, his final actions all communicate a moral code that previous critics either missed or that genuinely didn't exist before this sequel. Harry becomes a defender of lawful justice rather than its vigilante alternative operating outside proper channels. He draws clear lines between his approach and that of the rogue officers, establishing boundaries that define legitimate authority against its corrupt imitation with unmistakable clarity. This moral rewriting serves the production's larger goals while also enriching the character himself considerably. Harry gains complexity and depth through his ethical evolution, becoming more interesting than a simple tough guy who solves problems with his famous firearm alone. His values shift visibly on screen, and audiences witness a protagonist wrestling with questions about justice that the original never fully explored or even acknowledged. The character emerges transformed, his new moral code firmly established for future installments to build upon. Number 24. The sequel that outgrew. Conventional wisdom holds that sequels pale compared to their originals, trading depth for repetition and insight for spectacle designed to satisfy undemanding audiences. This film defies that expectation so thoroughly that it demands reconsideration of what follow-up films can achieve when ambition guides their creation. Rather than simply continuing the story established by Dirty Harry, the sequel expands upon it in ways that add genuine complexity and thematic richness to the entire franchise. The depth achieved here surpasses what the original attempted or accomplished in its controversial runtime. Where the first film presented a straightforward conflict between cop and criminal, this sequel explores the far more troubling territory of corruption within institutions meant to serve justice and protect innocent citizens. The questions raised are harder, the moral landscape more treacherous, and the implications more disturbing than anything the original dared to explore despite its reputation for pushing boundaries. What emerges is that rare sequel that actually outgrows its source material through ambition and execution rather than mere repetition. The franchise matured significantly with this entry, evolving beyond its origins into something more substantial and thought-provoking than anyone anticipated. Critics who dismissed the series based solely on the original missed how dramatically this follow-up elevated the material to new heights. The sequel didn't just match its predecessor, it transcended what came before in ways that few follow-up films have ever managed. Number 25. More relevant than ever. Some films fade as their cultural moments pass, becoming artifacts of specific eras with little to say to subsequent generations watching decades later. This movie has traveled the opposite trajectory, gaining resonance as decades pass and new debates about authority emerge in society. The questions it raised in 1973 haven't been answered. If anything, they've grown more urgent and contentious with time as similar conflicts continue erupting. Contemporary discussions about police power, accountability, and the limits of legitimate authority echo throughout the narrative with startling clarity that feels almost prophetic. Audiences watching today encounter themes that feel ripped from current headlines rather than 50-year-old concerns about institutional overreach. The film's warnings about unchecked power and institutional corruption speak to ongoing struggles that show no signs of resolution in modern society despite decades of debate and reform efforts. This forward-aging quality transforms the movie from period piece into living document that speaks across generations. Its relevance hasn't diminished. It's intensified as society continues grappling with the same fundamental tensions the filmmakers explored half a century ago. The warnings embedded in the story remain unresolved, the questions still demanding answers that haven't arrived despite countless conversations. What seemed like commentary on 1970s anxieties now feels like prophecy about challenges that would only deepen in generations to come. Magnum Force stands as far more than an action sequel designed to capitalize on its predecessor's success at the box office. It represents a deliberate transformation of a cultural icon and a mirror reflecting the social fears that gripped 1970s America during one of its most turbulent periods. What appeared on the surface as another violent cop thriller actually contained layers of moral complexity and ideological purpose that most audiences and critics initially failed to recognize or appreciate. The secrets hidden within this film reveal a production far deeper than its reputation has ever suggested to casual viewers. From its origins as a response to controversy, through its careful repositioning of Harry Callahan, to its warnings about authority without accountability, every element served a larger purpose that deserves recognition. The filmmakers crafted one of the most misunderstood and thematically rich crime films of its decade, a movie that continues speaking to audiences 50 years after its release with surprising relevance. If you enjoyed uncovering these secrets, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into cinema history. Tell us in the comments, do you think Magnum Force is more powerful than Dirty Harry and why? We love to hear your thoughts.